Lucamus Prime here, so it's time for the next episode of my new series, which is Old is Better Than New. And in today's video, I thought I'll this time cover a movie franchise, and this time it's for a movie franchise which is based on comics. And these comics, of course, are Marvel comics. This was one of my favourite comic book franchises of all time, until it completely went downhill, which is why I'm covering it in this series. And this franchise, what I personally think the old is better than the new, is none other than the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So, now, if you guys are wondering what I think of this franchise, so, for those of you who don't know, I am a massive fan of Marvel Comics. I've been a fan of a franchise since I was a kid, and my first superhero, indeed, of course, is Spider-Man. And I, of course, binge-watched this entire franchise from the start, of course, with 2008's Iron Man, and I absolutely loved it. It was a great start to the franchise. And it had, of course, 3 phases which made up the Infinity Saga. And the Infinity Saga is one of my favourite cinematic stories ever. And I think they did a really great job telling its story, because they, of course, were able to gradually tell a story. They didn't rush things or anything like that. They allowed plenty of character development for the main characters, being, of course, the Avengers themselves, alongside others, such as, for example, introducing Doctor Strange and also Black Panther, and also Spider-Man as well, and also the Guardians of the Galaxy, and also Ant-Man, among many others too introduced. And I think they did a really, really great job with it. And I must also as well say that many of these old films, in my opinion, have really great visual effects for their time, especially ones in the first phase of a franchise, in my opinion. Like, it's really amazing how these first phases start in 2008, and they look absolutely amazing to this day. Because earlier this year, I also actually re-watched the Infinity Saga to do reviews for it. And to go back down memory lane watching those films, it made me really appreciate them a lot. Especially compared to what came next, because when it comes to my stance on MCU, to me, the franchise ends with my favourite one, which is Avengers Endgame. And it's also amazing to me as well how these old films gave me such great cinematic experiences too, because I've seen several of these films at the cinema, but my best experience watching them had to be with watching Endgame and Avengers Infinity War, and I definitely had an absolute blast seeing them at the cinema. Definitely worth every single second of my time watching them, and I definitely really love watching them very much. And I think Endgame, to me, was definitely a great ending. If you want to see why I think it's the end of the MCU, then check out my episode of Movie Didn't Need a Sequel, where I was talking about why I think Endgame is the end of the MCU. Because I feel that the saga that came after Endgame, for the most part, in my opinion, is just so, in my opinion, terrible in comparison. And I say for the most part because when it comes to what I've seen since Endgame, in my opinion, the best film that they've done since that film, for me, is Spider-Man No Way Home. And that's actually as well the last MCU film I ever saw in my life too. Because when it comes to this new saga, it's of course kicked off with Black Widow. And I thought the film was okay, really. And I kind of wish we got that in the timeline released after the release of Captain America Civil War. Because that, of course, made sense for a timeline because it takes place after Civil War. And I also think it should have also been released before Captain Marvel as well, or as I call it, Craptain Marvel, which to me is the worst Infinity Saga movie. But I thought the film was okay. Then, of course, we got Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, which I thought was also once again okay, but pretty forgettable in my opinion. Because one thing about this new saga which really annoys me is that, in my opinion, it has many characters who I don't care about and I personally think are forgettable or annoying, compared to the great characters we got introduced in Infinity Saga. For example, in Infinity Saga, I absolutely love Iron Man and also Captain America, Thor, among others too. And when it comes to Hulk, I personally think he was at his best in the 2008 movie. I feel like since then he's slowly gone downhill, especially today, in my opinion. And I, of course, also love Black Widow and Hawkeye as well too, and also as well others too, like Doctor Strange and Black Panther. And then, of course, unfortunately, after I saw Shang-Chi, I saw what was, in my opinion, the worst MCU movie, and that, of course, is Eternals, or as I nickname it, Crapternals. If you guys want to see me destroy that trash, then go check out my rant on it that I did when I got back from seeing it from the cinema. Because I think the film is absolute garbage, and And I say garbage because, in my opinion, it makes Captain Marvel look like a masterpiece in comparison. Not saying much because that film's also trash too, but this film, in my opinion, makes it look like a masterpiece because of how bad it is. Like, no characters that I liked in the film whatsoever out of the main characters, and in my opinion, appalling visual effects, and in my opinion, a sluggish, dreadful pace, which made it so boring for me. Like, when I look back at Infinity Saga and I compare it to that, it's just appalling, in my opinion, how the Infinity Saga did its stories much better than this. Like, better stories, better dialogue, I must say, because the script, in my opinion, was so terrible, and better characters who I cared about. Like, I don't know what happened whatsoever. And then we, of course, got Spider-Man No Way Home, and because of how much I hated Eternals, I made the decision to stop watching the MCU with No Way Home, and it looks like I made the right decision, because No Way Home, in my opinion, gave a pretty decent closure to my time being an MCU fan. I mean, I still love the old films, that's why I reviewed them early this year, but when it comes, of course, to the future, though, you guys are probably going to asking me, because I've stopped watching the films, am I still aware of what's happened since then? And yes, I am, because since I started watching the MCU, I've heard nothing but bad news about it for many of the films. I've even heard that apparently the CGI is much more worse and worse, and I'm also aware of many examples. For example, one particular one that I think is shocking for this year's standards for me is MODOK. And if you guys have seen that third Ant-Man film, you'll know what I'm definitely talking about. Because that CGI, from what I've seen from people's posts of it, looks absolutely horrendous from what I've seen of it. I'm no stranger to it because people shared clips on Twitter, and I think it's just absolutely horrendous from start to finish what we did with that character. Not to mention how they made him Yellow Jacket from the first Ant-Man movie and made his defeat pointless. Like, it's just so stupid, and personally, I think with this new saga, they've really, in my opinion, rushed it way too much, because they've literally confirmed 2 new Avengers films to release in 2025 and 2027. And that's only, 6 years after Endgame. Whereas, of course, with the Infinity Saga, it took them 11 years to build up to these final 2 Avengers films, Infinity War and Endgame. 10 years and 11 years for those 2 films right there. And in my opinion, it worked much better because they didn't rush things, they built up a story, introduced us to the characters, they did the world building, they built up the idea of Infinity Stones being the story. But with this, however, I personally think they really messed it up with this saga, and I think it's broken. And from what I've been hearing about from reviews, I personally think this franchise is dead. And I know you guys are also going to be asking me, am I aware of Jonathan Majors being fired from the franchise? Well, yes, I am, because I heard about it on the news. And so this, of course, doesn't bode well. So if you're going to ask me, do I think they should recast Kang the Conqueror, or maybe, of course, scrap the story? In my opinion, they should just simply end the MCU right there. Just stop this franchise for its own sake, because I think it's long dead. Endgame to me is where a franchise ends, and No Way Home for me, and of course, Far From Home, are the epilogues I can accept. The rest of it, in my opinion, no. Endgame to me is the end of a franchise, so I personally think they should end the MCU sooner rather than later, because due to, of course, them firing the actor who's playing the supposed new bad guy, this franchise now, they should just end the franchise before it goes even more downhill. Because I've no doubt in my mind it's going to get worse and worse. Like, since No Way Home, I've not heard good things about what's come after in this franchise whatsoever. And that also includes television show territory as well, because when it comes to Marvel or Cinematic Universe shows, I love Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I've seen a lot of that show. I think it's a great show. And I also, as well, had lots of fun watching the Netflix shows too. Before being thought it got done onto D-. Massive mistake they made there. Because in my opinion, those shows belong on Netflix for a reason. Because that's where we started. And it's also appalling to me how many of those shows are much better than what we're getting today as well. Because when it comes to TV shows, which are on D-, I've watched the first season of What If, and I only watched that show because it was Chadwick Boseman's final ever performance before he died, rest in peace, and Wakanda forever. But in my opinion, a lot of that show was very appalling, I must say, really. And I also tried to watch Hawkeye, the first episode, and I stopped watching it because I hated the first episode. I thought it was terrible, in my opinion. Just not how you start a series whatsoever. And honestly, it makes the Netflix shows, including ones I'm not much a fan of, like Iron Fist and Luke Cage, look like masterpieces in comparison too. So yeah, just appalling in my opinion, really. And in my opinion, the best of all shows was Daredevil as far as I'm concerned. But when it comes to this franchise, I personally think it was at its best with Infinity Saga. The Infinity Saga, to me, is where the MCU was at its best, and that's how I like to keep it, really. And I even, of course, own a vast majority of the films on Blu-ray, many of them in steelbooks too as well. And it's always a pleasure to rewatch the great ones. It really is. And I also appreciate them a lot now more than ever too, I must say, because of where this franchise is going. So, all I can predict is that it's going to keep on failing, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if these Avengers films are massive disasters, because I think they're going to be massive disasters, and I'm not going to waste my time on them, because I've unfortunately been asked the question, will I be watching the films after No Way Home? And to reiterate, I am not going to waste a single second of my time on what's coming after No Way Home whatsoever. Nothing can be done to make me go back to the MCU whatsoever. To me, it's a franchise that has died. And I like to pretend it lasted from the first Iron Man film up to Endgame, with Far From Home and No Way Home as decent epilogues, which are made by Sony, not Disney, as far as I'm concerned. So, long story short, guys, I personally think that MCU is a massive example in terms of a saga franchise based on comic books where old is better than new. For tons of reasons, better characters, better stories, better CGI and visual effects, absolutely. And better story arcs too, of course, which are done really well, not rushed, and they build up the characters and develop them really well. So, that's my opinion on a franchise. I'll keep rewatching the great films, absolutely, because they're all fun to watch. If you want to hear my thoughts on them, go check out my reviews for them, and also my video on why I think Endgame did not need sequels. So, you know the drill, guys. Be sure to give this video a like. Also, be sure to also in the comments what you guys think of the MCU. Do you think all's better than new with the MCU? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Also, be sure to join Team Prime by pressing subscribe to come in the future. And I love you 3000.